Fly Fishing Insider Podcast is teamed up with Fly Fish Finder app to revolutionize your fishing adventures. Save time and unlock the ultimate experience with access to 55,000 trout streams, precise bridge data, thousands of trails, and detailed species locations. Elevate your angling with real-time maps, top camping spots, and connect with local fly shops for expert tips. This is only a little bit of what is available on the app. Discover all of it on the Fly Fish Finder app, another tool for getting better at catching fish anytime, anywhere, and for any species. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Fly Fishing Insider Podcast. I'm your host, Christian. We're going to do another episode today of Get to Know in the manufacturing district. So today we're going to talk to John Radle. John is with Bauer Reels in Winston. And if you're not familiar with Bauer Reels and Winston, you should really do some research. Those are two great companies. They have some tremendous products, and they've also had quite a bit of innovation in this space. So check those out. John, what are the web addresses for those two businesses? Are they both on Winston, or?
You can find Bauer Reels on winstonflyrods.com, but if you go to bauerreel.com, you can also find us there.
Okay, awesome. So you can go check those out there. We're going to come back on another episode and talk Bauer Reels, but then we're also going to get somebody else from the Winston side to come on, talk some fishing, and then dive deep into rods as well. So we're going to do that another time. But today we're going to get to know John and talk some fishing. So John, you are now in Twin Bridges, Montana. You grew up in Austin, Texas. Mm-hmm. And we were talking, as Austin, Texas. I mean, you were like a diamond in the rough for fly fishers down there when you were young. There weren't too many, but it was actually, as you mentioned, a fairly decent scene because Austin has some other areas and whatnot around it that are attractive. So I thought that was really cool. But you told me a little bit like, hey, I went to Telluride, I saw the San Miguel and people fishing, and it was like, boom, that's what I want to do. So you've taken your life after that. Been a guide at a couple of locations, school, retail outfits, etc. Did school in Montana. So today we're actually going to cover Twin Bridges in the fly fishing around that. And then we're going to come back with a tip because one of your favorite things to do is actually streamer fish with a two-hander. So we're going to talk streamer fishing and two-handers in the tip section today, guys. So John, again, thanks for coming on the show, man. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. It's should be a blast, man. I'm excited for the conversation we're going to have and excited to talk some fishing.
Perfect. That's what we're all about here. Our motto is any fish, anytime, or any species, anytime, anywhere. So if we can help people do that, man, we're on the right page. And, Twin Bridges is a great place for fly fishing. Tell us a little bit about the area for those that don't know about it, like what's available around you, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah, totally. So Twin Bridges, Montana is kind of it's one of the meccas in fly fishing. We're located in southwest Montana, parked right at the foot of the Tobacco Root Mountains. We have 4 pretty amazing trout streams right here in our backyard. So actually the confluence of the Big Hole, the Beaverhead, the Ruby happens right here in town to form the Jefferson River, which is part of the Missouri River drainage system. So we're super spoiled to have premier dry fly fishing, premier streamer fishing, premier trout fishing year round here in our backyard. And then kind of as a side note to, the 4 main rivers, we also have an abundance of spring creeks in our area, which is something that all of us personally love to do here at Winston and Bauer. But we're spoiled, man. You can think of open grassland in these big valleys with big mountains, a little snow on the top, fishing dry flies in the summertime and flip-flops. That's pretty much what we like to do around here. So it's a good place to be.
That's it too. I mean, you guys are the dream from a Montana standpoint of you get those plain-like valleys that are just abrupted by beautiful mountains in the backdrop, but awesome water in between that. And I love the description. Flip-flops and dry flies is pretty much it. It's pretty awesome.
Totally. Yeah, that's what we live for around here. Like every day after work in the summertime, you can find us at a couple of our favorite spots, and the crew goes out, get a couple beers, and just make fun of each other while we mess up dry fly eats in the afternoon. It's
Yeah,
great.
that's right. It can get pretty predictable for you guys too with a lot of that spring creek fishing. It's pretty happy.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we kind of go through like the standard, mayflies, and kind of start with Betis early season, and we get your caddis and you get your PMDs, and you kind of go through the summer with those. And like last year, we got really lucky, and those hung on for a long time. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and then we get pretty good terrestrial fishing at the tail end of summer, and that's leaving out salmon flies and stone flies. That's not even talking
Yeah,
about
yeah.
that and touching on the bigger rivers. But yeah, we're pretty spoiled. It's a fun place.
What do you notice between the difference of the two river types, where you have your big rivers and then you have your spring creeks? Um, for you as an angler, do you target them differently from a hatch standpoint? Curious to understand your perspective on it.
Yeah, totally. Kind of we can start big and work down. I mean, I we have freestone rivers and tailwaters here in our backyard,
Mm-hmm.
and both those play very differently. So the big hole being my favorite freestone right here in our backyard. That's going to be much more of like your typical bigger river drift boat style fishing. You're taking you and two of your best buds and going down the river, 5 and 6 weights most of the time. Take a 7 weight streamer stick. Um, and that's going to be more of your stonefly hatches. We start with squallas early season, and you get
Mm-hmm.
salmon flies, golden stones, sallies, and then you kind of have your mayflies start working in that time period, and kind of go through that natural progression that's more typical to freestone rivers. And then kind of scaling down, right, going and playing more on like the beaverhead, it's our tailwater scene, and then some
Yeah.
spring creeks around here. That's going to be much more of like your mayfly fishing. So smaller bugs. PMD season is kind of what we live for on those creeks and on that stream. Um, we and Yeah, you don't miss the big bugs there, not quite as
Mm-hmm.
prolific, but you get exceptional, mid to late June, July, um, really, really good mayfly fishing, and then terrestrial
Yeah.
fishing in selling season.
Your hatches in the warmer months are probably a little better there because of the water temps and things like that. Is that what you're typically seeing?
Yeah, yeah, and that's kind of a nice thing too. Is like on a year like this, right? We have a pretty weak snowpack in Southwest Montana, and that just it ebbs and flows. That's how it goes.
Yeah.
And so likely the big hole this year is going to be hooed out pretty early, which is
Right.
awesome. It's we're trying to keep that river system, trying to sustain the good ecosystem on that river, and part of doing that is respecting the resource and leaving it alone when it gets too warm.
Yeah.
But the cool part is we do have that tailwater option in the Beaverhead, which the reservoirs are looking really good and full this year, so those should fish well into August very, very well, as well as some of those Spring Creek options, right, that are going to maintain a cooler temperature regardless of flow.
Yeah.
hmm
That was what I was going to ask about the spring creeks around there. Did they flow pretty good regardless of snowpack years and temperatures? Or are they really susceptible to that? It's really dependent on the region, so I'm curious.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, they're pretty hardy. They most of those are tapped into the groundwater, and they're being
Mm-hmm.
fed from aquifer, right? So, their temperatures stay pretty consistent and flows stay pretty good. It's kind of interesting. I mean, a lot of them are private, right? Especially in
Mm-hmm.
this area, and there's a lot of ranchers that have kind of seen the economic benefit of having a fishing creek on their property, even if they aren't fishermen themselves, and
Mm-hmm.
understand that. So there's a lot of like bank restoration, habitat restoration being done on those to improve the fisheries, and yeah, and those stay very healthy throughout the summer.
Yeah, yeah. Is it pretty easy to find private water to fish up there in public water in the Spring Creek area? I mean, if you want to fish Spring Creek, I'm assuming it's a simple Google search for Twin Bridges Spring Creek fishing. Boom, you got it. But from a public standpoint, how does that go about?
Yeah, totally. There's definitely a level of if you are willing to put in the miles on your boots or get creative and float into stuff. Montana stream access law is pretty amazing. You
Yeah.
can walk up anything in between the high and low water mark. So there's a little bit of that that can be done. So if you're willing to get creative and do some research on Onyx, and find your way into some cool, maybe a little bit lesser known water, that works really well.
Okay.
As far as the private stuff, there's outfitters here that outfit a lot of those, and so if that's something
Okay.
you're interested in, that's where you should go.
Yeah, because you got a guy from Pennsylvania coming out, and he's got a long weekend. He's maybe not as much into like, oh, I got to do a ton of research and wait
Hmm.
for miles just to get into where I really want to be. He might go, I'm just going to boost for it for a day or something. So that's great.
Yeah, absolutely.
But the public access, you're right, in Montana. I mean, you guys have been a staple for years on public access, this high water mark. And gosh, I wish we had that here in Utah. It's still a struggle with a lot of those scenarios going on in privatization.
Totally. It's a super unique thing, and like I've been blessed growing up in Texas, we had really good stream access, and then being up here,
Mm-hmm.
really good stream access as well. But Colorado is kind of similar to Utah in that, it's landowners own the riverbed, so can't drop anchor, can't walk up private stretches, all that stuff.
Yeah.
So kind of seeing both sides of that definitely makes you like super grateful for being
Yeah.
able to strap on the boots and go as far as you want to, which is pretty
That's
unique.
right. Yeah, we kind of see the same thing here in Utah. It's a lot more like Colorado style, or even New Mexico now
Hmm.
has fallen into that realm. But the high water mark's awesome. I mean, I've been on the Ruby River and hanging out in the water, fishing,
That's
private
awesome.
land, and it's been pretty awesome. That's a great river to fish. So,
Hmm.
yeah, go check that one out. So, you you fish all arts, but you really like the streamer fishing. We're going to talk two handers in the tip, so I want to save some of that. But
Hmm.
tell me a little bit about the dry flying fishing capabilities. I mean, you got Spring Creeks, man. It's got to be pretty
Yeah.
epic. I have not fished there, so I'm very interested.
Totally. It's awesome, man. Like I think that the like kind of the classic Montana scene, right, is you're in a drift boat going down a bigger river, throwing at the bank or fishing mid-river structure and kind of playing that game. Um, and while that's super fun, it's a great time to spend with your buddies. It's not quite as personal as Spring Creek fishing. I think that's what draws me to Spring Creek fishing. It's this very like surreal, intimate experience with your surroundings. You got to walk slow and you got to tread lightly and you got to be very
Mm-hmm.
observant, super locked in on what's in front of you, right? Because these fish can tuck into like cut banks or be nestled in, and they end up right in front of you. And
Yeah.
so I mean, like from last summer, kind of like one of my like moments when I think last summer, what were my best fly fishing moments? Like I was walking up a spring creek and came around a corner. And my buddy like taps me on my shoulder behind me and like kind of stop, and both of us are looking like, oh yeah, that is one. And just like 15 feet up in front of us, kind of on this slow round bend, inside, parked up underneath some overhanging grass. There's really nice brown trout there, just kind of cruising, and he's obviously slid up out of his like kind of home in the deeper water that's on the left side of the creek, and he's in his feeding lane and looking for food. And so we sat there for 5 to 10 minutes and just watched this thing just
Yeah.
kind of go
Timed
check
it
out.
out.
Totally. Yeah, there wasn't really like an active hatch going on. This was in like later September, so it was kind of full on terrestrial season. And so he was like, checking everything out, coming by in the water. We saw him probably smoke a few nymphs underwater. We just flashed his gills and we're like, all right, well, he's kind of doing it. And so had like a size 16 pair kicking hopper on, made my first cast. I'm like, all right, let's see if he comes off the bank a little bit, put it like 3 feet to the left off the bank, and he slides out and kind of looks at it and just goes straight back. I'm like, well, maybe he didn't want it out that far. And so put it back right on his nose about 2 minutes later. And on this one, he like pulled fully, like turns up his two front fins, parks underneath it, and just floats backwards with the fly. I'm like, it's about to happen. Like he's going to crush this thing. Comes up, noses the bug out of the way, and goes straight back home. And I'm like, oh gosh, like, we've got a smart one here. And
Right.
so we
The
sat around
heart's
for,
fluttering. What's your buddy doing at
oh,
this moment? Because he's got to
oh,
be watching this, right?
totally, yeah. He's my buddy Matt's like 10 feet behind me with the net, just like losing his mind that the fish didn't eat on the last cast, and both of us were like, "Oh frick!" Like, all right, let's crack a beer and let's sit here for a second and reevaluate life and like see what we're gonna do.
Right. What is it
So
about that, where you're with your buddy and you're fishing dry flies and you see those almost eats and you're both it's like so funny, it's like little kids in the grass, like, oh my
totally.
god, dude, did you just see that? That's so insane. Like, I thought
Oh,
he had it.
100%.
And you're just like, oh, it's like quivering, let me change something up, So what was your next step? What did you do?
Yeah, totally. So yeah, we sat there and we watched him for a little bit longer, let him cool down. We didn't want to present fly after fly over his head, so we gave him about 10 minutes and went to a little foam ant and just downsized
Mm,
and went a little stealthier. Kept the leader the same because the creek we're in had a lot of wood structure in it, and like it's a big fish. So if you hook him and he goes into the wood, you want to be able to pull on him a little bit.
Yeah.
Just stuck down like I think it had like a 12.5 foot 4X leader on it or something like that. Just downsized the fly. Um, and then he's giving me constant shit from behind. They're like, "You can't make this cast. You won't do it." And my buddy is, and we put the fly
All the
back in.
encouragement in the world.
Oh yeah, man, he's so supportive at this moment in time. He's like, "You're about to go 0 for 3. That's a strikeout. Then I get the try." And I'm like, "All right, all right, all right." But yeah, we put that in on, made the next cast, and sure enough, he does the same thing. Comes up, parks underneath it, floats backwards. Except this time, he just sucks it in from right underneath the water. So never even broke the surface with his nose, but just inhaled the ant. And I was fortunate enough to set the hook, and all mayhem broke loose. Then it was like all bets are off. This creek's super
Yeah.
skinny. It's like 10 feet wide, and there's a down tree right across from us, and fish runs underneath it. Stick my rod tip in the water. You can like feel the line tink 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 tink
Tink, tink,
tink
tink.
off.
Oh,
Oh,
dragon.
oh, totally. Like he's just rubbing me all over these like little branches and stuff that are poking down into the water, and somehow he decides to do a 180 and come out of there, comes straight back at us. So I'm like running backwards, hands in the
Peeling.
air, picking up fly line, trying to not lose tension on him. And he got crossed up and beached himself on a weed bed in the middle of the creek, and my buddy was able to net him, and it was
Oh,
epic,
wow.
man, epic
So
moment.
your
So
buddy's like doing the jump in, like just get it in the flipping net, like.
oh, totally. Yeah, he's full on like waist deep in there, just getting ready to net this thing whenever it presents an
That's so
opportunity.
awesome.
It was sick. Yeah. So
So you
no, go
land
for it.
them,
Yeah,
crack some beers. I mean, sit on the bank. Is that what the plan was, or what did you do?
totally, man. I mean, we landed him, took a quick picture, kept him wet, got him back in the creek, and then just sat back there and relived it for a few minutes, and yeah, then went on and tried to replicate that the rest of the day a few more times, and yeah, I mean that's summer fishing for me around here though, and
Yeah,
that's a memory I'll have to me to the grave, and with good buddies and good fishing and fun flies, and yeah, that's
yeah.
that's the pinnacle.
There's something about being in those Montana spring creeks where it's the high grass and you're like stealthily going up, peeking every once in a while, and then you see something, and then you're stepping back and you're making the cast over the grass. You're finding your lanes, and like you said, sometimes it's like I don't want to put it right next to the grass. I want them to come out. Let's see
Hmm.
that first. And is that your standard like approach technique? How do you like the fish of Spring Creek?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple different, like, if it's a single fish like that one, it's obviously kind of like running the roost, and he's all by himself. There's no other eyes around. Um,
Yeah.
Usually pretty delicate with our presentation and pretty cautious. Like, I don't like to get too close to those fish if I can avoid it. I like to try to make a little bit longer cast, and then I never start with my leader or my fly anywhere near the fish. Usually I'm working off to whichever side he seems to want to feed more. So if like he
Hmm.
seems to be feeding left more, I'll present the fly left, but give him a little bit of room and just see if he'll make a run at it. Because I never like to get too close too fast. That just tends to spook fish from my experience. So,
Hmm.
and then if he doesn't want to play ball, then that's when we'll kind of do like in the story I just told you. I'll start progressively making those casts closer and closer to being on the money, or try to, and then if he doesn't like the fly selection, give him something smaller to look at. But it's interesting. I think I've gotten blessed to like fish creeks like that with some older guys that are way better in it than I am. And the biggest thing that like helps catch fish on those creeks is patience, and being a little bit methodical in your presentation and thinking through what the effects of your cast are going to be. Not
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
going in there willy nilly running gunning, but like really taking time to observe that fish and learn what that fish wants, and then try to approach him in the best way possible.
That patience one is a big one because I mean, for me, I always get in that position of like, oh man, this thing's going to be gone. And then
Hmm.
you realize, like over time, as you do it more and more, you realize that fish isn't going anywhere. They're eating. They're hungry. They're having fun. It's me that's spooking it off. So if I just take my time, I won't spook it. And then a lot of times, like I did a bunch of dry fly fishing up on the Missouri from the bank, and
Hmm.
um, I was in the LOG, and I was like, dude, this is sick. But I was fishing a fish, and I had a couple where I like would spook them off a little bit, and
Hmm.
they'd go into the deep water. And I'd just sit there, and sure enough, not even 10 minutes later, they're like creeping their way up again. And the last time I was up there was awesome. Spooked them off like twice. I was like, oh man, this is over. Sat there in a bank. I had a buddy up on the hill looking down. He's like, hey, he's coming back. He's coming back. And it
That
was
was
like,
awesome.
okay, I'm going to change it up again, but I'm going to add a dropper. And the
Hmm.
dropper is what ended up doing it for me because it just wasn't having dries. But
Hmm.
man, it was that methodical approach that you described is exactly it. Like, take your time, observe, take a little bit more time, and then change it up. I love the change up, and I love the small change up scenario that you did. Like, I'm gonna use some basic stuff. I don't need a big hatch. I just can change it up a little bit, go small, and see what happens.
Cool. Yeah, I mean they're opportunistic feeders, right? If you put protein in their face, they're gonna probably at least take a stab at it. So yeah, that's super cool. Were you guys were you guys hiking on the left side? I'm trying to remember what access that is at LOG that you had
Yeah,
kind of already up by the dam.
we were down. We were hiking in on the left side.
Cool.
From there's a camp access down there. We had fished the dam areas a couple years prior, and I
Okay.
had gone down for like a late day in that same area, which was actually one of my more memorable moments I'll never forget. We were down there. It was like a epic PMD hatch. I'm like, oh my gosh, our water starts boiling. And I'm like, yeah,
Hmm.
man. I get my fly on and I start making casts. And I'm like, what is going on? This storm like picks up. Next thing you know, the flies are just blowing off the water, but the fish are still eating. And I'm like, casting this little PMD, trying to catch fish. And it's like, you can't tell what's what, and you're not catching anything. And I'm going, what's going on? And then finally I was like, I'm just going to start swinging this thing because it's getting drowned anyhow. And boom, it was like first hit. And then it was like, okay, it's on. But swang a dry, and then below the dry, I had a little wet fly PMD, and it was like, this is incredible. And I'll never forget that first swing I swang was still on super light tippet, and I was like, boom, and like had it and gone instantly. Yeah, but after that, I remember my buddy coming, I gotta get home. My girlfriend, and I was like, I don't care.
You're like,
Can't
I'm
hear
here,
you,
man.
buddy. Can't hear you. So yeah, epic fishing up there. It's a beautiful place, man. Beautiful place.
That's awesome. Yeah, no, it's a pretty cool zone.
You're a streamer fisherman now. Are you streamer fishing for sight fishing in some of these spring creeks as well?
I haven't done that game as much. When I go fish a Spring Creek, if I'm gonna take the time and the work to get in there for a lot of these, or like kind of some of our staple spots around here where I have to go fish in the afternoons, that's a dry fly session for us in the
Okay.
summertime. Um, if my streamer fishing primarily takes place from like early spring on, and I'll fish in the summertime too. Normally it's a little bit more of an early morning or late afternoon game in the summertime.
Mm-hmm.
And then in the fall, that's kind of the classic time to go do it. Me and my buddies always have a debate if the streamer fishing's better in the spring or the fall around here, and I
Yeah,
think
yeah.
it's kind of, I don't know, you get your days, but yeah, that's typically we're doing that on drift boats. I'll wade streamer fish a little bit, but for the most part, we're floating and throwing streamers, and then like on some rivers like the Mo or sometimes down on the Yellowstone, if in certain runs that we've kind of like pegged as our swing runs, we'll pop out with two-handers then and swing and
Okay.
slow it
Okay.
down a little bit and swing with bigger bugs. But yeah,
All right. So your non two-hander areas, because we're going to talk about that in our tips, but those non areas, what do you like to run on your setup? Do you run a sink line up there, or are you running a float? What's going on?
yeah, I definitely like to take I'm ripping 7 weight with a full 30-foot sinking head or 25-foot
Mhm.
sinking head. If I'm fishing a deeper river that you're kind of trying to slow the drift down and really work down into like a channel or something like that, that's when I'll put on like a 15 or 25-foot tip, and with a floating line behind it, and that way you can really mend that streamer down to the water level you want to work in. But for a lot of our rivers around here, like especially on the Madison and the Big Hole, where you're not maybe working as deep, that's when that full sinking 30-foot line comes out to
It's really
play.
nice. Yeah.
Yeah,
And
and
then you use lighter flies, you cast a little easier, things like that.
totally, totally. I think like the name of the game with that sinking line setup is you really want that streamer to get to depth quick, but then
Mhm.
maintain that depth throughout the retrieve, right? And that's really what you're looking for with those lines. And so, and yeah, and it gives you the ability to throw a little bit bigger profile, and a little bit lighter flies, so you don't have to rock humongous dumbbell eyes to get down to where you want to get to.
Yeah,
And yeah,
I like
that's,
that too.
hmm
I like the way they feel when they cast, right? In comparison, I mean, you get that sink line on there, and you're like, I can cast a mile, you know, just kind of launch it, load the rod with no effort at all. Whereas when you're with some of those beadhead flies, man, it's just like throwing an anchor, right?
yeah,
Feels really jankety, like bam, 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 bam.
totally.
So when you when you're fishing that streamer, um, are you real big on your jerk strip? How do you maintain your action on your fly?
Yeah. So I'm a pretty big, my buddies and I go back and forth on this. I'm a pretty big proponent of using the tip of your rod to move that fly, to articulate that fly, right? Create movement. So yeah, I'm a pretty firm believer of jerk stripping and then jig stripping in the right scenarios. And for the viewers or listeners that, don't know what that is, that's basically you moving your rod either like straight up and down or at a 45-degree angle. And then when you pop that fly back, you pick up the slack with your other hand, right? So you're not
Mm-hmm.
stripping and moving the rod at the same time. You're popping the rod and then picking up the slack with your strip. Uh, and I've just found it's like a confidence thing for me. I've just found I can swim the
Mm-hmm.
fly better. I can stop the fly where I want to, and just create the action and the movement that I want over different
Yeah.
water types with that type of strip, versus a straight strip where you're much more limited in the distance and I guess the aggression that you use to move that fly. Like you
Yeah.
can really rip on a single, just like straight stripping, but
It just doesn't move
there's
as much water and create as much angle on the fish. Like I like the way that a profile changes. The way I look
hmm
at that is like you're changing perspective to multiple angles where a fish is going to see a profile versus they're only going to see a profile kind of one way.
Totally.
And that's usually, as an angler, if I think about it, how do I see fish? I see flashes, right?
hmm
They're so camouflaged and so well protected in that way. The way that I see them is a flash. So if I'm a predator, a flash is an indicator to me that I'm going to go do something.
hmm
Whether that's right or wrong, I don't know, but that's always the mentality I carry. I love that jerk strip. And
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
described it right. Like it's key. You move your rod tip to change the action, and then as you come back to that straight cast, you're pulling that or straight look at the fly, you're pulling that slack in. And the key
hmm
is on a jerk strip, some people do what you had described as you don't want to do them both at the same time because then you're at the back end of your strip and you're moving your rod and you're creating a bunch of slack in the line. So you're losing contact with your fly and you're going to miss sets left and right. Plus, you're all the
hmm
way back at the back of your strip and it's that jerk and kind of stall where a lot of your eats happen. So now you got to totally reset your hand to get your strip in, which you get your strip set, but now you got all that slack in the line. So it's not until the end of the line that your strip set's actually hitting your fly.
hmm
So great points on covering that because that is so important.
Totally. I think it's such a cool way to present a streamer. Like a lot of what we're doing around here is getting that streamer to swim downstream head first. So presenting
Mhm.
that streamer on the bank and then being able to pop that streamer off the bank and make it swim at whatever speed or stop wherever we want it to, but with that downstream head first profile. Um, and that tends to, I feel, just confidence key for me. I feel like that gets more eats. And it's a little bit easier to achieve that action and achieve that presentation of that fly, um,
Mhm.
with that jerk or jig strip. Um, it's cool too. I think streamer fishing is like a lot of times for people, it's just kind of like a huck and duck and pray, where I'm just
Yeah.
gonna like murder the bank with this thing all day long, and we're just gonna hope a fish eats it somewhere in between the tip of my rod and the boat. Um, and like it definitely works. Like you can put on attractor streamers and go rip them around all day and you will get fish to eat. But I think kind of like the fun in it for me is when it becomes more visual, you slide that boat
Mhm.
in maybe another 10, 15 feet, get a little closer to the bank or a little bit closer to that mid-river structure you want to be working, and then like really focus on I'm not fishing this streamer just as like as many presentations as I can per minute and just ripping it
Mm-hmm.
back. I'm like
Yeah.
I'm fishing this thing like I would a dry fly or like a nymph. Like I'm approaching a water type. I'm trying to make this fly end up in the right place
Right.
and really trying to like feed it to the fish.
Yeah.
And I think that's where it becomes super interesting. Is like when you're reading water and you're really
Yep.
trying to make
Yep.
that streamer swim the water like in the most effective way.
Yeah, like when you're coming down there and you know, like, hey, there's a really hard shoal here. I'm gonna cast it up on the bank. It's 3 strips, and then I'm just gonna stall, let that thing sink, and then it's boom,
Hmm.
boom, and that's where I expect my eat. And
Hmm.
being able to repeat that, like, okay, I know I got my 6 or 8 strips in. I'm just gonna pick up and recast because after that, I'm not really the eat I feel is gonna happen right there, right?
Yeah,
I'm in the zone,
absolutely.
so it's very
Hmm.
cool. Very cool. All
Yeah.
right, so let's do this. We talked quite a bit about the Twin Bridges area. We talked some spring creeks. You talked, you got some other water types, et cetera. You fish them more like
Hmm.
standard Montana waters. That's great. So
Hmm.
you have this really broad perspective, twin rivers or twin bridges, but you like streamer fishing two-handers. Now you mentioned that, like, hey, sometimes I'm floating and I know, like, hey, here comes a big hole I can swing, and this is an area we like to swing. You have them identified. Might not be as easy as someone just showing up for a vacation or a trip, but
Hmm.
tell us about your two-hander technique and what you really like to look for first, and then let's talk about some of the techniques that you use.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, so this is kind of something that I started messing around with a lot more in the fall. It's really, browns that time of year are staging to spawn or setting up to go on their spawning run. And so we have fisheries around here where that's either going to be resident fish that are kind of staging in certain water, or what we like to go target a lot of times is lake run fish that are coming
Mm,
up out of a lake system, coming up into the river system to go find gravel flats however many miles upstream to go spawn that fall and kind of create the next generation. And so as those fish move up and as they stage, they sit in water like a steelhead would, when it's moving up the coast or moving into a river system as it kind of
mm-hmm.
hits stopping points along its journey. These brown trout do a very similar thing.
They'll
And
stack
so
and wait.
Totally. And so you'll find them in water that you wouldn't normally find big predatory browns in. You're going to find them in those kind of deeper, more classic style runs, or just soft water in really weird places where they want to lay up and they're just kind of giving themselves a break before they hit the next push. Um, and so that's kind of where that two-hand rod comes in. This is like, we'll identify those areas, identify those water types, um, and then try to present a streamer to them with a two-hander. A lot of these are going to be, not always a long cast, but in some scenarios, in certain bodies of water, it's going to be a longer cast, and you're going to need to turn over a little bit bigger fly um, with a heavier sink tip. And a really good tool for doing that is, a 5 weight, 12 foot 5 weight is kind of my go-to, but 12 foot
Yeah.
5 weight two-hander, the Skagit setup on there, and it's a really enjoyable way to fish, but it's also a really effective way to create kind of a jigging swing presentation for these bigger kind of predatory browns that are stacking up ready to go spawn.
Yeah. And um are you swinging more standard style flies, or are you like, I was talking to Steve from Squala
Hmm.
the other day, and he swings like just miniature style OPE or Skagit style flies, right?
Hmm.
Spay flies. What do you like to swing with?
Yeah, totally. I'll do a little bit of that. And I love doing that kind of like in the wintertime, when things slow down a little bit and it's kind of like a little bit more classic, like you're not articulating the fly much, just letting it swing. But in the fall when we're like searching, and going hunting with our two-handers, that's going to be throwing like almost full-size sex dungeons, kill whiteys, we'll do double screamers, flies with really big cone heads on them. And really, the profile and the action that we're looking for is something that's kind of catching the water and starting that swing and kind of hitting that 90-degree coming across the current, but that fly is really undulating and really doing these big jigs. So we won't straight swing these flies. We're using our offhand
Mhm.
to strip that line and really try to provide movement and then let that fly fall. So you're pulling that fly up really fast and then let it fall back in the water
Letting it
current,
fall. Okay,
and you're trying to invoke that reaction eat, right?
that's
Anything
that's
to get
cool.
that fish pissed off enough. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's a
that's
fun way
cool.
to
And
fish
I
one.
apologize, I misused the name. It's not Steve from Squall, it's Kevin from Squall. Um, and he does similar, and he uses a
Hmm.
lot of like the older school, like wet fly techniques where you're just doing rod
Hmm.
tip lifts and things like that, and letting it sit and slowly rocking back and forth, and just like you said, getting it in that zone and creating those odd movements just to get a reaction. And I love the strip and drop. And so, are you using heavier flies for that, or are you using primarily your weighted tip to get that drop?
We're still using heavier flies to really create that like jig action. It kind of helps to have a fly that's
Yeah.
pretty heavy on the head. Um,
Hmm.
and then we're just using that Skagit setup to present that fly at distance, basically, and save
Okay.
you from having to do some crazy back cast over structure behind you, and
Yeah.
save
Yeah.
your arm a little bit. So the sink tip does provide a level of like getting that fly to stay in the zone. So depending on the run, we'll go anywhere from like a 10-foot section of T8, 12.5-foot section of T8 to 10-foot section of like T11, just to keep that
Okay.
fly at whatever depth we're trying to achieve. But then after that, it's really up to the fly to provide that action as you're, stripping or jigging or we're doing whatever you want to do with the tip of your rod and
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
your strip. Yeah.
When you're trying to impart that action, a lot of people like to lay their tip on the water or in the water, to
Hmm.
achieve their depth. But when you're doing that jig action, do you like to have your rod tip a little higher so that you're getting that upward strip and then letting it fall? How are you managing that jig? Because I think that's really important. Is getting a really nice jig is probably like an extremely valuable aspect.
Totally. Yeah, no, that's a big component to it. So if we're going for something that's maybe a little bit more moderate, less aggressive, and usually I'll start implementing those strips later in the season when the water cools down and fish are a little bit less active. That's going to be rod tip in the water, kind of like you mentioned, and just using your offhand or your stripping hand to, pop that fly line back and then feed it back through the guides and pop that fly line back and feed it back through the guides. And that's what's going to be
Mm.
jigging that fly. If fish are acting hot that day for some reason, or earlier in the fall, like September, early October, that's when I'm gonna activate the tip of the rod. And instead of using my stripping hand to really articulate that fly, I'm just gonna
Mm.
pop my rod tip and then slowly bring my rod tip back down. Pop my rod tip, slowly bring my rod tip back down. Um,
Okay.
and that's basically the difference in moving the fly, 3 or 4 inches per jig to like 6 to 8 inches, right? And it's just that
Yep.
little bit extra added pop and sharpness of it,
Gets
right?
that. Okay. Well, let's talk about this. This is a probably a steelheader's nightmare. You get the eat. What do you do? Do you wait and praise the queen, or do you strip set? What's your methodology or thought on it?
Yeah, a lot of these eats you're gonna know they're on there. I mean, you're fishing a pretty big fly. It's articulated, has 2 hooks. Um, you're just gonna get tight. And my methodology is kind of once you feel that get tight, you lift the rod into them. A lot of times, what I find too doing this is, especially when they're a little bit more aggressive and you're actually jigging the tip of the rod up and down, um, you're gonna just set into the fish naturally on the jig. So
Yep.
that fish eats it on the drop, and you have a little bit of slack. You don't feel it. You go for the next one, you hit them, and it's just on. And
Hmm.
that's a lot of kind of what I've experienced. Sometimes out on the hang down, when you're retrieving back up to yourself, you'll get eats, and then I kind of am a little bit more of like save the queen, like let him eat it a little bit before I lift my rod and apply pressure.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
But for a lot of those eats, they're there.
Yeah. Hmm. And are you fishing heavy enough leader material and tippet that you're stripping those fish in, or are you really trying to get them on the reel? Because probably got a fair amount of line out. How much are you trying to shoot on an average cast?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the casts are going to be like the head, so the head
Okay.
and the tip, and then maybe like 5 to 6 strips. You're not really bombing them. It's not like you're steelhead
Yeah.
fishing where you're really stretching it out.
Yeah,
It's
30 to
more
60 feet then, right? I mean, that's what you're talking about.
totally, totally. You're kind of staying in a closer range, and that helps with hookups. But it's also just like what those holes require a lot of the time. You don't really need to cast clear across them. You're just trying to effectively work the water the fish are staging in. Um,
Okay.
And so, yeah, so pretty close cast on a two-hander perspective. And then for tippet, or sorry, for a leader build, I rock straight 20 pound. And if they're acting a little shy, it's about a 2.5 foot section of 20 pound to some 16 pound. So
Yeah.
pretty heavy.
So it's,
So,
yeah, heavy. I mean, 16 pound, you can yard on a fish. I mean,
hmm
you have a brown trout that's going to break you off on 16 pound. You got a winner.
Totally, totally.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool. Well, man, that's super helpful. And your flies, you mentioned the flies. Go through that list again. Some of the things that you really like to throw, and I would say maybe by season or by stage, right?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, so for as far as streamers go, we kind of use same flies year round, but a lot of what I do is changing colors and profiles, right? So how that fly is swimming and how that fly, and what color that fly is. So kind of like staples for us around here are a lot of the Kelly Gallup streamer patterns, but
Mhm.
double screamers, sex dungeons, kill whiteys, peanut envies, kind of the
Mhm.
bigger stuff. We will fish down, Krelix minnows are pretty dirty, but those work really well, a
Yeah,
little bit
they
smaller.
do work well.
Um, yeah. And we'll go down to single hook stuff every once in a while. But for the most part, I really enjoy watching fish eat big stuff. So that's just kind of what I prefer to fish.
Yeah, I agree.
Um,
There's nothing like pulling a big slob out of the water and it's got this like mop hanging out of its mouth, and you're just like, yeah, that was good.
Totally, totally. It's super cool to like watch that and like that. Like every fish has like the killer instinct. They want to go and they have to at some point to get to a certain size. They have to go
Yeah,
kill other stuff. But it's cool to like make that happen and be like, all right, we turned you from a dry fly sipper to a meat
yeah,
eater,
yeah.
and it's cool to watch that happen.
You're no longer eating shrimp cocktail. You're down to the steaks, and that's perfect. I love it. That
Totally,
is,
totally.
yeah. And it's funny too nowadays with all the social media. You see more and more fish with fish in their mouth, and you're like,
Hmm.
I would have never expected that, but that's what's happening all the time. Every time you're getting these gold streamers out, I mean, dude, that's a little brown. That's not trying to imitate anything else. So good on you, man. Well, John, it was great having you on the show, man. We learned a lot on the Twin Bridges area. I'm really excited to get you back, talk about reels. So when you come back, we're going to talk
Absolutely.
about reels. We're going to get into the details of, what makes Bauer different, and then what to look for in a reel in general, like how to evaluate drag systems, how to look at anodization, what does arbor size mean, and reel retrieve mean, etc. So looking forward to that, John. And guys, thanks for tuning in. Again, it's John and John Radle from Bauer Reels in Winston Rods. And I got your name right, my man. We'll talk to you
Yeah,
soon.
man. Nailed it. Thank you. Appreciate
All
it.
right. Thanks, guys. See you next week. Fly Fishing Insider Podcast is teamed up with Fly Fish Finder app to revolutionize your fishing adventures. Save time and unlock the ultimate experience with access to 55,000 trout streams, precise bridge data, thousands of trails, and detailed species locations. Elevate your angling with real-time maps, top camping spots, and connect with local fly shops for expert tips. This is only a little bit of what is available on the app. Discover all of it on the Fly Fish Finder app, another tool for getting better at catching fish anytime, anywhere, and for any species.